Hey there, all you ghouls and goblins. Radio 85.9 proudly presents Horror Zoid with your hosts, Stevie Scares and Natalie Nightmare, talking all things horror from the 80s, 90s, and today. Today's episode is brought to you by Mummy Brand Burn Cream. The only thing that would make it more soothing is if Brandon Fraser applied it himself. Welcome back, everyone, to Horror Zoid. My name is Stevie Scares.
And I'm Natalie Nightmare.
Thank you for joining us once again. Today's episode is going to be a little less formal than it's been in the past. We're not really going to talk about the origins of this genre. We're really just going to get into what we like. Because, honestly, if you trace the origins back on this, you could probably go all the way back to the very beginning to, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Haxon and all that, and find elements of this genre. And, of course, we're talking slow burn horror movies.
Absolutely.
Slow burn horror movies. If you're curious as to what that is, it's the kind of movie that a lot of the action takes place in the final act of the movie, whether it's, the last 15 minutes, last 30 minutes. A lot of the end portion of the film is where a majority of your action sequences take place, with the rest of the film focusing on plot and story, building that sense of dread, that discomfort, that unsettling feeling that you get from these creepy-ass movies. So that's what we're talking today, and we've got quite a few to get into that we'll kind of just touch upon and let you know what our thoughts are on them.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this episode. I feel like it can be, some of the ones on this list are pretty divisive within the horror community, and when we sat down to kind of jot down some ideas, once we started talking about it, the movies just started to pile up. So we have a lot to kind of go through if we want to, and probably are going to hear a lot in the comments about ones we've missed.
Right, yeah. So we're not going to get to every one of them by any means, but we're just going to talk about some of the ones that we really like, because we noticed this genre. We've talked about slashers and vampires and final girls and scream queens. So a lot of genres that bring a lot of excitement, and usually from start to finish, they're kind of this almost there's thrilling element to them. Whereas, these slow burn horror movies, again, they're a little slower paced. They take their time. And I think that's probably, you mentioned they're very divisive. I use the word polarizing a lot of the time. People have heard me use that term before. And they really are. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
No.
Some people do like that faster pace, the slashers, the chasing, the in your face, demonstrative action type movies. Whereas we like those too, as we've talked about in the past. But we kind of wanted to shift gears and talk about this a little bit, and why we like something that is really on the opposite end of the spectrum of other things that we've talked about as far as that would interest us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to kick right into it just to piggyback off the last episode where we were talking about one of our favorite final girls with It Follows. It is a slow-paced movie, and there's startling scenes, and ultimately you kind of get this more explosive ending. And those are the kind of movies that we're going to talk about, and I feel like that's just kind of a good way to shoo it into this new episode here.
No, that's a great example, and we'll get to more examples here as we move along. But It Follows, I said it last week, I'm pretty sure. It Follows, in my opinion, is the best film made in the last 10 years. Best horror film made in the last 10 years. I don't think anything really compares to it. I think it has atmosphere, mood. The score is beautiful in creating that. I think you get a wonderful leading performance by Maika Monroe and other supporting actors in the film. But it really harkens back to some older horror movies as well. It kind of pays homage to, I always think of the stalking scenes with the entity. They always remind me of Halloween and Michael Myers.
For sure, yeah.
The score reminds me, it's very John Carpenter.
The score is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're talking about the stalking, and you get this, everyone jokes about the monster that just walks slow at you, and that's what the creature or this entity in It Follows does. You never see it run. You see it crawl through a doorway or this or that. But even the scene with the most harmless looking thing, that old lady walking across the college campus. All she's doing is walking.
It is it's the creepiest scene I've ever seen. I don't
Yeah.
like it. Oh, she is
It's
so
freaky.
unsettling.
It's super unsettling. So it really only ever travels as fast as its host is. So obviously when it's the tall man played by Mike Lanier, you know, obviously he's gonna probably move faster. He's like 7 feet fucking tall.
Big strides.
Right. But then there's like the little kid and the old man and the old lady and the young girl.
Yeah.
You know, they're all gonna just move as fast as their host is.
Right.
But they still move slow. But
Right.
there's something so terrifying about it.
I kind of want to backtrack here because we've been talking about certain aspects of the movie. And if you don't know, so basically It Follows, 2014 film directed by David Robert Mitchell. Genius job. The plot of the movie is a girl, no other way to say it, she gets a sexually transmitted curse demon entity that follows her. And the only way to get rid of it is to then have sex with somebody and pass that demon curse entity thing on to the next person. So you find out, I mean, obviously right away you can already tell this is a giant metaphor for sexually transmitted diseases. And David Robert Mitchell has gone on record as saying it is a metaphor for that and kind of the stigma that is related to sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, STIs, and things of that nature by representing it through this giant metaphor, this brilliant and beautiful metaphor where a sexually transmitted disease is now a killer entity, harkening back to slasher movies. It's the big bad chasing you throughout the whole film. So it's terrific concept, taking this wonderful new age metaphor and bringing it, bridging it with the old school horror tropes of slashers. It's not a slasher really when you get down to it. There's not a lot of cuts and blood as we've talked about, but it does have that those slasher vibes where you're stalked, you're chased, you are on the run from something that if it gets you, it will kill you.
Exactly.
So that is that's kind of what we've been talking about with these entities and these shapes and these figures. It can take on any form, really, and when it does, you have to figure it out and get away from it, or if you don't, as we see in the film at one point, you will get got, as the kids say.
And it's either going to be like extremely leg breaking in the wrong direction crazy, or just this kind of weird energy draining way. But it's
right. It doesn't kill in the same way either, which
No.
is brilliant about it. But again, as we talked about, this is a slow burn horror movie because a lot of the movie is like we said, it's not a slasher. There's not a lot of cuts and blood. A lot of the story is told through, these almost this vignette style where they are trying to find out more information about this entity. They're going and finding resources, and then they once they realize what it is and where it comes from, they are on the run. And basically just backing up and backing up and backing up until the main character finally gives in and decides to pass this sexually transmitted curse on to somebody else. And that's really in that final act when she makes that decision. That is when a majority of the, quote, action takes place, and we start to see a little bit more of a gruesome nature of the entity and its stalking. And we get to see that brilliant pool scene. If you haven't seen the pool scene and
Phenomenal.
It Follows, it is absolutely just, it's breathtaking the way they're able to make you feel a sense of dread and just terror. I mean,
Really?
it is a
Yeah.
terrifying scene when you think about what Jay, the main character, goes through in that scene.
I think the whole movie really does a fantastic job of making you feel uncomfortable and unsafe, because half the settings are the living room, a
Right.
car, a park, like these simple little things, a movie theater, and a beach house. And all these places should be comfortable or safe, and they're not. Nothing is safe.
I
in
love that you
movie.
point that out because that is a big part of the movie that people don't talk about a lot in the analysis. Is it is a lot of what the film does is it creates horror in settings and in places that you wouldn't think would be terrifying or horrific. Like you said, there's one of my favorite scenes is in the very beginning of the movie. Jay goes on the date with the guy who at the time is the only one who's infected with this curse. And they're in a restaurant and you can't hear anything except the brilliant score of the movie done by Disaster Piece. And but you see something in the distance just walking. And it's so early in the film, you don't know you don't know why
Yeah.
why we need to focus on this. You don't know why the camera's there. You don't know why David Robert Mitchell decided to show this. But at the same time, you do know that you're supposed to feel scared.
Yeah, it's a very good first of many scenes where you really are just scanning the background, wondering if it's this entity or not.
Yeah, David Robert Mitchell plays with periphery so well. And we could talk about It Follows for
Right,
a
and
long time. As you've noticed with us, we can go on about certain things for a long time. But
But
we're
this
going to move on.
this one I wanted to give a little
Yeah,
extra love
yeah.
to because it's something that's really special to us, and I don't see
It is very special.
the more I look at my list, I want to say, a lot of people like It Follows, but there's a ton of people I see that don't like it. I feel like every movie I have on my list, like the one that I was kind of leading into, talking about feeling safe in a home, was The Strangers, which is also a slow burn.
Right.
And I don't see a lot of people say that they don't like that. It's mainly the shit sequel. But looking at other movies, The Shining, super divisive. Blair
That's
Witch
true.
Project, super divisive. I always feel like people love it or hate it.
The
And I think-
Vavitch.
the Vavitch. I think a lot of these on here are just a love and hate kind of relationship, and I tend to love them all.
Right, and I think that's another reason why we decided to pick slow burn horror movies as the genre we were going to kind of focus on today, because it is very love it or hate it. And I'm curious to get people's thoughts on this after we do this, and maybe revisit it in the future and do a part 2 and kind of a viewer feedback kind of thing or listener feedback. But I don't know. I really can't pinpoint a reason why people like them, why they don't like them. I enjoy story-driven, narrative-driven, detail-driven, and detail-oriented horror films and films in general. I, as a viewer, want to be rewarded for paying attention to a movie. And I think for people like me who enjoy that satisfying feeling of a reward at the end of the rainbow, I think slow burn horror movies are what we are looking for.
Right.
And I think if you're one of those people that just wants to sit down and shut your brain off, these aren't the kind of movies that you're gonna seek out. And maybe that's what it boils down to.
Right, and there's definitely times that I'm not in the mood for some of these movies. Now, some of them I think we personally have just watched them so much they've become comfort movies. It Follows alone, just having on in the background with the music, is a comfort movie. The Shining, we watch it so much, to us, it's a comfort movie. But if, you're sitting down to watch these for the first time, they're definitely not a shut your brain off kind of movie. So yeah, there's times I may not be in a mood to try to pick one of these movies to watch, but ultimately I agree. I like that you point out the reward at the end, because they usually are explosive at the end. So all of the tension or the mystery that you get through the movie, you get that payoff in the end, and I love that.
Right, and it's funny that we use It Follows as our first example, because ultimately it's one of the movies where you don't really get a payoff. Not to spoil anything, but you really don't get a satisfying ending.
You do and you don't, and there's a lot of speculation.
Yeah, but kind of moving on to other examples, I kind of want to focus on, I want to bring attention to the fact that if you're looking for a kind of general example, kind of a painting with a broad brush here, what slow burn horror movies are, look no further than A24. A24
absolutely.
is a film distributor, and you see their logo pop up on a ton of horror movies. You're going to see a lot of people on Horror Talk and on social media and on YouTube talk about these movies, because A24 is just a very hot button issue right now. Not issue, but it's a
buzz topic. I
It
think.
is. It's a popular studio right now.
Right.
But their movies are the perfect example of slow burn horror movies, because a lot of them are very dark, very macabre, very quiet, very slowly paced. A24 movies are kind of the best example of your slow burn horror. Right. And the reason I bring them up is because I want to get into some of them. And the other one I think we need to mention right off the bat that's a favorite for both of us is Hereditary from 2018, the film directing debut of Ari Aster.
Yes, that is a movie. I love that it's the number one movie that I can think of that when we left the theater, we weren't really talking as we were walking out. We hit the doors, walking out to the parking lot, still not really saying much, and get in the car, and we were just kind of like,
the fuck did we just watch?
I have to fucking talk about this. And it was, for us, it was scary. It was a great movie. It was traumatizing to watch in a lot of ways. But I loved the fact that we had probably a 2-hour discussion about it after the fact. It wasn't
And we've
just
had
like,
so
wow,
many discussions since then.
that was really fucking cool. I loved all the slashing and hacking, and it was just a fun kick-ass horror movie, like when we leave after Halloween. Not that that's bad, but I love having a discussion after a movie.
Yeah, this one, and we've mentioned this on the podcast before. We've mentioned Toni Collette, Ari Aster, the movie itself. It's one that I think people, if you've listened for the last few weeks, this is one of our absolute favorite films in the genre. But yeah, you mentioned just some of the fact that it is one of the most thought provoking movies that we have ever watched. And again, like I said, to this day, we still will sit there and have these in-depth discussions as to the meaning, as to some of the subtext that is hidden in the movie. And each time, I think we uncover something new each time we try to delve into it and analyze it.
Yeah, and I think, and this might just be something that's a personal fave for me, but I like it when a movie can make me uncomfortable in all the right ways. And this movie,
The way a horror movie should make you uncomfortable.
Yes.
I think that's another reason why I love this movie is because
Yes.
it checks all the boxes as
It
to why
does.
we love horror movies.
It does, because you get this dark mysteriousness, you get the uncomfortable dinner table scene, which is very based in reality.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a horror movie during that dinner
No.
table scene. It
I
felt
mean,
like
it did and it didn't.
it felt like somebody put a camera in every suburban home in America and just hit record because
Right.
that was like
It just felt like a very real fucked up family.
right. That again, horror wasn't even on my mind during that scene. It was all
No.
just like, holy shit, this is a real family argument.
Yeah, and it's, again, going back to what I said, it just made you uncomfortable in the right ways, because the performances alone just make that scene the absolute perfection that it is. But everything leading up to that scene, because my most uncomfortable scene is just the silence that you get as he drives home, he walks upstairs, he lays down, wakes up to screaming. And that whole scene, just the way it continues, it just, even talking about it gives me goosebumps, because
Right.
it's so brilliantly done without even showing you anything
Right, and
other
that's-
than his face.
And that is another element of slow burn horror movies. A lot of your gruesome scenes aren't necessarily going to be shown in great detail. You're going to more focus on the performance of the actors, kind of in the nebulous of the action, around the action. The story is told around the action. It's not focused on the action. And Hereditary is the perfect example of that. And what we're talking about, I'll just get into specifics of it. If you haven't seen it, sorry, but you're about to fucking hear about it.
I think everyone probably knows the most important scene in this movie.
Well, and
that's
the thing. It's like you go, it's like halfway through the film at this point, and you are, this is your. So again, you're halfway through the film by this point, and you get this one moment of great action, and then you don't really get anything till the last 10 minutes of the movie. But that pivotal scene where the sister Charlie is decapitated by a telephone pole, that is the central fucking moment of the movie.
Yeah.
But again, after that, it goes back to being this incredibly slowly paced fucking movie. It's like, how do you just slow down after a decapitation? Only Ari Aster is capable of that kind of transition, that kind of pendulum swinging, narrative that you see here with Hereditary.
See, and you say that, and it starts to make me think of some of the other movies where, it's almost like they give you a little bite, like, hey, look at this really extreme thing. Like, I've never seen a scene where someone's leaning out the window and get decapitated, let alone the brother drive home with said headless body in the back seat. So it was already jarring. But even going back to The Witch, there's a scene where literally she steals a baby and grinds it up and rubs its blood on her body.
Yeah.
And then it just chills out until mostly to the end of the movie again.
Yeah.
Where people start biting the dust.
Right. And then you mentioned a great transition, The Witch. The Witch is one that I see a lot of people love or hate, but I enjoyed it, and I'll admit it's one of the It is a horror movie where not a lot of action happens, period. Even when
Right.
you get to the end of the movie, the action is very, very, very
It's
brief.
very dialogue
It's
heavy.
dialogue heavy. It's a terrific story. It relies on the acting, it relies on the atmosphere, it relies on environment,
Ugh,
and
the
it makes sense.
atmosphere in that movie
Right.
alone. I mean, just the dad's voice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything about the way that movie feels is just fantastic to me.
Agreed, 100%. I think it did it. Robert Eggers, the director of the movie, this 2014 film, Robert Eggers directed it, and before he was a film director, he was a set designer for a movie. So it makes sense that when you look at his films like The Witch and The Lighthouse, and The Northman, these films are very heavy on the way they look. The
Yeah.
look and the feel are just as important as anything else in the film. But then with The Witch, you would expect something that is so accurate, time wise and atmospherically, you would almost expect the acting to be subpar because you spent so much time getting the set right. And that's
Right.
not the case.
It's not at all.
The acting it matches the set and scenery tenfold.
Yeah.
You talk about we've talked about her last week on Scream Queens and Final Girls. Anya Taylor-Joy does the performance of a lifetime, and she was so young at this point. But
Well,
to
and
deliver such a raw
yeah.
performance is just beyond impressive.
Right. And, I started to get excited there thinking about it because everybody, it kind of threw me off a little bit when I put it in because I feel like we are programmed to watch these period movies where everyone, for some reason, in England has an American accent, right?
Well, this is New England. This is
Right.
America,
Right. But, you expect no matter what the time frame, it's just going to sound like a normal movie. But even the way they talk is, perfect for the time. And it almost throws you off because we don't talk like that anymore. And you kind of have to deprogram your mind to understand the dialect. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. It is a movie that doesn't feel like it's one of the first few movies that feels like they just, again, like I said earlier, it's with Hereditary, like they just took a camera and put it in every suburban home in America. This feels like they time traveled and filmed something very real. Not that any of us
Right.
know what it would be like, obviously, legitimately, but it really, like, when you picture it in your head, this is a great translation of that. And I think that's Robert Eggers' biggest strength. When you describe what The Witch is about, and you have something in your head about what it would be about, this is it. Like he's able to translate that from his brain to the screen better than any director I've seen in a long time.
Right. Exactly.
The visuals alone may prove that he's a brilliant mind for horror.
Exactly. No, that's a perfect way of saying it.
Yeah, and talking about some other great slow burn horror movies. One that we watched earlier this year is Saint Maud.
Oh,
Saint
man.
Maud is one that I feel like we need to talk about because it is recent. But it kind of, I don't want to say it flew under the radar. I thought it would get more love than it has, but it kind of died out. Like it came out, people seemed excited about it, but it just ultimately didn't really go anywhere.
See, and you say that, but I feel like I've seen a fair amount of people talk about it, and everyone has nothing but amazing things to say. It's definitely a movie that is really up there around The Witch with me because I love the religious imagery in both of those movies.
Right.
But Saint Maud kind of ticks it up a level, I think.
Yes, Saint Maud definitely does kick it up a notch. It is very much a religious trauma movie. Morpheus Clark, the lead actress in it, deserves all the praise really because
Yeah.
it's a one woman show in a lot of ways. You do have a terrific supporting cast, but their screen time alone pales in comparison to what she's able to bring to the film. She carries everything, and she's an absolute heavyweight with the way she portrays Maud as this flawed character that you shouldn't empathize with because she is obviously unhinged. She is very out of our reality. She's in her own reality, just out of our reality.
Right, but she starts as this very likable, kind of mousy typical quiet, almost, I hate to say it because it sounds misogynistic, but like well-behaved woman.
Right. She
But
is the quintessential well-behaved, religious,
right.
quiet,
But she
meek woman.
is, she is like a adult health care kind of, it's almost like you expect her to be that way a little bit. She's just this quiet home nurse that comes in and does what she does, but then it just turns into something wild as the movie goes along.
Yeah, it's again the movie, for those of you who don't know, Maud is the main character, and she we get a little bit of a backstory in the sense that she went through something traumatic in her previous job and has chosen to then become a in-home healthcare worker, and she is then put in the stead of a very rich old woman who was an entertainer years and years ago, but has since fallen on bad health and can't really live out her glory years. But yet she, has these elaborate parties and tries to take advantage of, the few years she has left. But of course, Maud doesn't approve because it is very debaucherous. It's very lascivious, if I can use a not frequently used word there. And then, of course, we see Maud in the third act go balls to the wall, as we see with these slow burn horror movies. That third act, she just kicks into high gear.
Talking to Satan through a cockroach.
Going on a bender, throwing all of her religious beliefs to the wind, and then ultimately climaxing in this almost like she's trying to restore her faith, but really
Blaze of glory.
It is just the most insane ending I've ever seen in my life. And that's really the most we can say about it in a nutshell. But it's like,
yeah, we don't want to spoil every single one of these.
Kind of what I do want to say, before moving on to another film, is just the fact that it is another one of those movies where you watch it and up until those last 30 minutes, you're getting a completely different movie.
Yeah. And to go on the tail end of that, another movie that we actually saw right before the pandemic, another movie where you get somebody who went through religious trauma and ultimately goes completely fucking unhinged. The Lodge.
I love The Lodge, and I'm glad we're mentioning it. It's one I've wanted to talk about a lot. We're talking about these slow burn horror movies, and we keep mentioning lead actresses. We've mentioned Maika Monroe, Toni Collette, Morpheus Clark, and now we're going to talk about Riley Keough. And of course, we talked about Anya Taylor-Joy earlier, but Riley Keough is one of the really biggest up-and-comers, not just in horror, but in a lot of movies lately. She's really branched out and done different things: comedies, dramas, action movies. Daughter of Lisa Marie Presley, granddaughter of Elvis Presley, so huge pedigree there to live up to. And Riley does this amazing job of demonstrating somebody who grew up in a cult but is now trying to adjust to normal life. But she's got some really tough circumstances as she is dating an older man who has these children, and the children and her don't really get along. Yet they have to
don't want a second mother. Their mother passes away. It's not a huge spoiler for the movie. So they're very reluctant to let another woman become a motherly figure to them.
Right.
This is also, I'm just going to put this out there, a movie you have to add on your annual horror Christmas movie watch list, because it does take place for Christmas.
Is it Christmas? It's a winter horror movie.
No, it's Christmas.
Is it? Okay. Yeah.
You're thinking of another one that we're going to get to.
Okay.
Which is Black Coat's Daughter, which is actually like a spring break winter, but it's not Christmas.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Because there's a scene where they put up the Christmas decorations, but then they take it all down.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, they end up going up to a lodge, hence the title. The dad goes into town, big snowstorm comes in, and kids decide a way to kind of maybe piss her off enough to go away is to fuck with her by triggering her religious trauma from her cult days.
Yeah. So again, a lot of the movie is told, you're learning these stories about her backstory as a member of the cult. You learn about the kids and their mom and the relationship. And it explores the relationship and the dynamic between Riley Keough's character and the two kids. And so it explores that relationship and her attempt to kind of salvage it and their attempts to break it. And ultimately it reaches a breaking point in the last few minutes of the movie. And boy, again, these movies, one thing I can't stress enough is that the payoff and the reward is so worth it. And it is and again, if you put in the time and you invest the time and you watch these movies, you are going to be rewarded with some incredible final closing moments that will
Yes.
leave you speechless.
Very much so. And if you're like me, so I grew up in the church, and I am no longer part of the church or any religion. So some of these with the music that's in the lodge is almost a little triggering for me watching it, but it doesn't make it bad for me at all. I think it adds to, like, there's the scene with the really loud booming hymn that's playing. And it adds so much to the movie. I will say there is a major trigger warning for unaliving in the first act of the movie. But past that,
And the third act
yes,
too.
and
I
the
mean,
third
it's
act.
there. Yeah,
It's
there's some hardcore trigger warnings in there that I think religious trauma, self unaliving, things like those. If you are made uncomfortable by any of those, the lodge, we really need to give you some hardcore trigger warnings there. Just like with It Follows, there's some trigger warnings for sexual content. So
Right.
one thing we're going to be try to be mindful of as we go on with the podcast is try to let you know if you want to watch any of these movies, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind before you walk in and decide to watch these. Because, we appreciate and understand that there are things
Right.
that some people will not be comfortable with. And a lot of these slow burn horror movies like to kind of push the envelope on a lot of those topics.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say, at least with It Follows, it's not like there's blatant non-consensual. It's just there's a lot of content.
There's it's a heavily sexually
Yeah.
driven
With
movie,
the
like
nature.
I said, with
With the nature
the
of it.
plot. But yeah, and then again with the lodge, self unaliving,
Yeah.
religious trauma, a lot of things like that will be very triggering and unsettling to people. And again, we just want to make sure that we're stressing that in a lot of these movies that we're suggesting
Yeah,
and talking about. We don't want to
don't have
yeah.
as much graphic content. I mean, there's the scary imagery, but there are a lot of I feel like with slow burns, there are a lot of very real, uncomfortable scenes that it's what makes them uncomfortable.
Right. It tries to, like I said in the beginning, it tries to build that unsettling tension and that discomfort. And, part of that is by touching upon themes that are not, pleasant and palatable and easily digested by a lot of us.
Right. Which moves me into one that we recently saw that for months and months and months, that's all we saw online of people saying we needed to watch The Dark and the Wicked.
Oh, The Dark and the Wicked. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's you touched upon The Strangers earlier, and it is also The Dark and the Wicked, also directed by Brian Bertino. Wonderful, slowly paced horror movie that it's keeps you on the edge of your seat because you're just wondering what's going to come next because you get these small little bits and pieces of these strange events and these horrifying events, but again, it's not really, it's like breadcrumbs, and then ultimately in the end you're like, holy fucking shitballs, man, what did I just watch?
Wow,
whoa,
shitballs.
fuck, man, whoa. Yeah, it's very much that kind of
It
film.
was a really cool movie. I liked the fact that it kept me guessing for most of the movie, like, what is this? Is it paranormal?
Yep.
Is it demonic? Is this lady losing her mind?
Is
like,
it real? Or
Right.
It's like, because it's the story paints the picture of two elderly parents who are helped by their two kids in their late 30s, early 40s who are not doing well on their own. So it's just this dysfunctional family of these adult children and these senior elderly parents. And, like Natalie said, you can't really tell if this is something supernatural, paranormal, or something where people are just in a shitty situation and they're just kind of depressed and losing their minds. But The Dark and the Wicked is also another part of another subgenre that we're going to get to later, where it's folk horror. And folk horror, basically all that constitutes folk horror is it just takes place in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those rural farm themed kind of horror movies. So if you like movies that take place on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and there's a lot of them at this point, this is one for you.
And a lot of those tend to fall on the slow burn. You know, I wrote down Paranormal Activity as being a slow burn, but even with the newest release,
Next of Kin, yeah.
Next of Kin, it is folk horror
It is,
in itself as well, by being on a farm in the middle of nowhere with a lot of weird, creepy shit happening.
It's easy to be slow and creepy when you're literally surrounded by nothing. I think is the ultimate message there, and that's why that setting, folk horror and slow burn kind of go hand in hand with a lot of these. But yeah, like you said, Dark and the Wicked, tremendous, and yeah, I don't think you can underestimate that at all.
No, not at all. I'm looking at my list here, thinking the next one I want to talk about. You know, I mentioned Paranormal Activity, and obviously it's got a shit ton of movies at this point, and I think most of them you could consider slow burn. I think
it became a staple of the film series, where it was, you know, it really kind of teased you in the early going, and then that last act it really hit it, you know, really sealed the deal and hit everything home.
Yeah, and it continues through the main parts of the movie, as most of these slow burns do, where it leaves you in your own mind wondering what most of it is. Honestly, the first Paranormal Activity movie absolutely fucking terrified me the first time I went to see it in theaters. You know, you can hear every single thing and the deafening silence that is most of that movie.
Well, because everybody in a theater is thinking the same thing. They're like, something's around the corner, something's going to get somebody. And it's like, and with the Paranormal Activity movies, a lot of the times you're not rewarded with something being around the corner, yet each and every single fucking time we sit there quiet, sitting on our hands, waiting for something to pop up, and it never fucking does.
Right.
Until the end.
And you get those first few nights where it's like, camera panning, you know, you see the little timer going and going and going, and nothing happens. They just wake up, and you're like,
every fucking Paranormal Activity movie toys with my emotions like that. You're right.
First night's good.
First night's always good.
There's a little, you know, maybe something, there's a noise, but
the curtain blew.
Oh, you know, you get air drafts and things, and you feel like you can be like, oh, that wasn't really anything. And then, you know, second night, there's, you know, a
second
door
night is
moving.
when you're sitting there and you're looking at the person watching it with you, and like, that fucking door moved.
Right.
And you're like, the person next to you is like, the door didn't move, dipshit. And you're like, no, it fucking moved, I swear. That's night 2.
Exactly. I feel like they all kind of have that pattern. And then, you know, you get into the third night, and you've always got someone's getting up, walking around the house in the middle of the night, or something's moving through the house in the middle of the night.
Later movies, it was always kids. Kids were always up moving around. Kids moving around in the middle of the night is always creepy. As somebody with 2 of them, as somebody with 2 of these little fucking things running around, I can tell you, if your kid is up running around in the middle of the night, you have a demon.
Yeah.
I don't make the rules. I just follow them. If your kid's up in the middle of the night running around, it is scientific fact. You have a demon.
You have a demon.
Yeah. And that's what the Paranormal Activity movies are. We literally just sum them up, and then at the end of the movie, you're like, God, fucking demons.
Yeah, fucking demons.
It's always fucking demons.
You know, so I think they have had a bit of diminishing return for a while, because they were just the same recipe with, you know, slightly different characters.
But the technology got better each time. It was like, remember the 4th one? It's like, you know, the Xbox Kinect? That's really fucking cool. Can we involve that in a Paranormal Activity movie?
And no matter how, you know, there's movies definitely that are weaker in the franchise than others, but that's something that I absolutely loved, that depending on when it was set, you either had the big VHS tapes, you had home video, you had
in the 6th movie,
you had a cam.
The 6th movie, you have the camera that apparently can see into other dimensions.
That one was that was on the bottom of my list.
I fucking hate Ghost Dimension. If you know anything about me, if you're gonna learn anything about me on this fucking podcast, I hate Ghost Dimension. Ghost Dimension can go live in the Ghost Dimension and fuck right off.
It definitely had some really cool scenes in it, and even with that movie, aside from the stupid Ghostbusters camera, there were other things in the movie that were like triggered by the entity, whether it were like Christmas lights and things like that. So even in that movie, they tried to do something new, but ultimately with Next of Kin, they just came back to, you know, big ol' recording camcorders.
Right. There's a few flaws with the way the film is filmed, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
but
there's
at the
definitely
end of
some
the day,
moments that
yeah.
aren't found footage. I don't think that they had drones
Right, I don't- yeah.
shooting their car from above. But, with those things set aside, for the most part, it is still together, and you have a really good creepy setting and a really cool backstory.
Yeah,
to set up.
the story of Next of Kin more than makes up for anything else, because I like where they went with it. I like that they took it folk horror and play with that. They really used that formula well. And the ending is something that I never would have seen coming. And they really just, again, they took that slow burn style and the pacing of those earlier movies, and they kept true to that. And at the same time created something new. And I'm really excited to see where it goes in the future here. I think it's a lot of potential for a franchise that we thought otherwise may have been kind of dead in the water.
100%.
Now, one that you mentioned earlier that I want to go back to and talk about, because it's one of our favorite directors lately, is Blackcoat's Daughter.
Hell yeah.
And if you do happen to listen to us internationally, I don't know how far our reach is right now, but I know this movie was also under a different title. I think it was just called February internationally. But here in the States, it was called The Blackcoat's Daughter. And it's directed by Osgood Perkins, a.k.a. Oz Perkins, for those of you who think that name sounds familiar. He is the son of Anthony Perkins, who played Norman Bates in my favorite movie of all time, Psycho. So long history there, long pedigree. But Blackcoat's Daughter, directed by Oz Perkins, and stars Kiernan Shipka, who, of course, plays Sabrina in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix, and also stars Emma Roberts, who is, of course, American Horror Story, Scream 4, a beautiful, beautiful movie. One of the most confusing horror movies I've ever seen. But I say it's confusing, but Oz Perkins really ties it together in such a way where like everything makes perfect sense at the end, and and when you finally do bring everything together, you realize how truly sad and just depressing and macabre this movie is.
Oh yeah.
It is
also
just
another A24 movie.
Is it A24?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know it was part. Look, at this point, I should just fucking assume A24 does every slow horror movie ever.
I was actually pulling it up because I was having a hard time remembering some of the names for the cast.
Yeah.
And saw distributed by A24. So there you go.
That's cool.
But it is a hella slow burn with some really bizarre payoffs, including like a bunch of dead nuns.
Look, you had me at bunch of dead nuns. I'm on board. Are you on board?
Dark satanic entities.
Yeah.
And honestly, very, very chilling performance by Emma Roberts.
Emma Roberts, although I enjoyed her, I thought she was fine in Scream 4. I thought she was fine in American Horror Story. When I watched this, it was the first movie I thought, damn, that girl has some acting ability. No
agree.
Disrespect to her.
No, not
I just
at
think
all.
it's probably her best performance from a range standpoint.
I think that there are roles that she's done in different things that almost feel like it's the same character. But there's been characters that she's done in American Horror Story that I've liked more than other seasons of American Horror Story. But this one, there's something about how quiet she is through most of the movie. I mean, really, most of the cast. But it's just eerie. The whole movie feels eerie and weird and confusing and bizarre. Like, you feel like it shouldn't be happening. It almost kind of feels like you don't even know what, like, time frame it is. I think it's just all around bizarre.
I enjoy that because it feels like it's disjointed, but it's not. It really isn't. It's like if you watch it, like
it all comes together
I'll be curious to see what other people think. But I remember when I watched it, I was like you said, I was having a hard time getting the timing of it. Like when are these scenes taking place? When are these other scenes taking place? And when you realize what the time frame truly is of the movie, you just have this giant holy shit jaw-dropping moment where it all comes together and the final piece of the puzzle goes into place, and you're like, what the hell? How did all these stories relate? And it's just it's wonderfully done, very masterfully done.
Yet another religious weird movie.
Right, because it takes place a lot of the story
It's like
takes place in a Catholic religious
like
kind
a
of
prep
school, school, yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll see that is it's subtle, but there's some religious undertones to it. Well, and some of it's not so subtle.
Some of it's not so subtle.
Lucy Boynton's character has some not
Right.
so subtle run-ins with the religious aspects of it.
Exactly. And going into religious aspects, I want to talk about one that I've talked with a few people on TikTok recently, and is a movie that you actually showed me, House of the Devil.
House of the Devil, yes. Directed by Ty West. We've kind of talked about Ty West a little bit, but not too much. Ty West is one of my all-time favorite directors, and he only came around in like the last 15 or so years. But he has done that slow burn style better than most people have done in the last 10, 15 years. And House of the Devil is one of his earlier works, and it's proof positive that he understands how to do a good slow burn horror movie.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, I think you could even say X is a slow burn.
I remember we were kind of outlining this episode, and I mentioned X as a potential slow burn horror movie, but I think it kind of walks a line where it merges the slasher genre with slow burn horror to
100%.
where you like. I lean more towards a slasher, but at the same time, I can't rule out some of the pacing. You can see Ty West's inspiration and his history as a director of these very methodical slow burn horror movies.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because, X, obviously, if you've seen it, it is a slasher genre, but it kind of has that odd pacing through it and a lot of what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, Ty West does that very well, too, because with The House of the Devil, 2009 release, it focuses on our main character who is looking for some money because she's trying to move out into a place of her own, and in order to get that money, she accepts a babysitting job until she gets there and realizes she's not babysitting as so much as she's old people sitting. And when as the story unfolds and she realizes that what she's been told about her job that night isn't exactly what's going on, and once she realizes what is actually happening, she is on a roller coaster of a ride, and so are you as somebody who's watching it. But some of my favorite parts of this slow burn movie with House of the Devil are really just where she's just kind of farting around the house. She's doing her homework because she's in college,
getting
pizza, watching TV, and the other and just kind of bebopping to music, which fantastic soundtrack, to be honest with you. But another example of you get like one or two jarring shots in the beginning of the movie, and then you just kind of get nothing, and then the film climaxes, and you're just like, you're just kind of like, you just have like this wind blown through your hair kind of expression, like, oh, that happened to me.
Yeah,
I was on a ride, something happened to me, and now the movie's over.
Absolutely. No, that's a pretty good way of putting it, honestly, for that one especially. I want to talk about one of my favorites and a really good You Go Girl movie, Midsummer.
Oh, yeah. So kind of coming full circle here, Ari Aster, who we talked about earlier, who directed Hereditary, his second and only other film to be released at this point as the recording of this episode is Midsummer, which is came out in 2019 and stars Florence Pugh, who has taken over the world lately.
Yeah.
Is everyone's sweetheart. But this is kind of really where she got thrust into the public eye because she did this really brilliant movie that focuses on a woman who is in just a shitty, toxic relationship. Her boyfriend's about to break up with her, and then her family dies, which that scene alone, fucking jarring.
Yep.
And instead of breaking up with her, he decides to take her on a trip to Europe to kind of salvage the relationship and maybe make her feel better after the death of her family.
Yes.
So while they're there, they slowly start to realize that this European friend they're in college with just brought them to a festival for cult.
Yay, cults.
Yeah, a cult in the Swiss Alps. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's like that kind of setting of the Swiss Alpsy kind of thing. It looks like a Ricola commercial if it was directed by Ari Aster.
Yes. Their friend is a Swedish guy. And the thing that I like about it is the actor that plays him is actually Swedish.
Yes. It's an authentic. The casting is brilliant,
Yes.
and they do a terrific job with the cast selection and the roles here, even down to the minor roles of like the actors who play the annoying couple that is also along for the ride to kind of provide some of that exposition.
Yes.
You're like, these guys suck. And then you realize, like, it's just a really good performance. That's why I think they suck. And I think that if I can look at somebody and be like, I fucking hate you because I know people like you and I fucking hate people that are like you that I know,
Right.
then you're a great actor, in my opinion. I don't know who they are, but they won me over by how they made me hate them.
No, I think 100%. You got that.
But Midsummer is great because you get these small little bursts of these scenes that really will damage your psyche.
Especially the start.
In the
Jesus
it's
Christ.
that's the funny thing. I still consider it a slow burn, but that's probably because it is one of the longer movies on our list.
Right.
It clocks in at a little over 2.5 hours, I want to say.
Yeah.
So it's a long movie, and so these short little bursts that you get, although they are very impactful, you go with these long gaps between these impactful scenes. So again, the story can unfold, the characters, you can learn about them, whether you like them, whether you dislike them, some of their quirks, some of their inconsistencies, and just some of the things that are just generally wrong with them, until you get to that third act and everything just ramps up in a way that you couldn't imagine. I know I say that about a lot of these slow burn horror movies, but that's
Yeah.
the point.
I was going to say, we kind of touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but when we were talking about, kind of what movies we wanted to discuss and what we liked for slow burns, we discussed really what it is that makes a slow burn. And the biggest thing that me and you kind of came to is that you do have that explosive finale for these
Yeah.
movies. The
It's almost-
payoff, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's almost like the slower the beginning, the bigger the payoff's going to be.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I hate to put it this way, but ultimately, if you're one of these producers of these films, it's like if your buildup is good enough, your payoff, it doesn't matter if it's good or not, because by the time you've got the audience hooked, you can deliver whatever ending you want. And I don't, and it's like, it's almost like at the end of it, like we're like, are you going to reward us, or are you just going to toy with us?
Right.
And I think that's part of the appeal of these movies is it is kind of a gamble. I'm investing my time, and I know it's like we're getting a slow burn, and you keep watching. It's like, oh, the payoff better be good. Oh, this ending better be good. And if it is, it's just like this cathartic release of like, holy, wow, I'm glad I stayed for the end, and wow, I'm glad I made it to the end of that movie, because it is such a terrific ending. And a lot of these that we're bringing up, we wouldn't bring them up if the endings weren't totally worth it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one thing too that I really liked about Midsummer is, it kind of got
Another
a lot
one with
of,
a trigger warning too, by the way.
Oh God, absolutely. It kind of got a lot of people talking about the actual festival, which is, cult aside, is actually a real festival that's celebrated in Europe. And I love seeing that, as a witch myself who does celebrate the solstices, Midsummer kind of falls in that, even if I don't celebrate it the exact same way. But, the scene when they're all dancing around the maypole, like, I remember doing that as a kid in church, which is really weird. It just goes to show how Christians adopted a lot of those things. But we had a little thing outside that we would kind of do that with, like, little ribbons. And I've met and spoke to a lot of other people who've done the exact same thing without realizing that it has a lot of pagan origins.
I love that you bring that up too, because it is something that I think gets glossed over, is the fact that it did get a lot of those pagan rituals so factually correct. If I remember right, Ari Aster worked to get a lot of those details correct in the film. It was important to him to get those details right as much as it was to get the horror right.
Yeah.
And he does beautifully on both. He's able to get these rituals, whether they're real or inspired by real rituals or not, with some of these cults that we've seen over the years. You get the sense of feeling like, wow, I could see, we all know people who attend religious services on a regular basis, whether that's you, whether that's somebody you know. We all know somebody who attends religious services regularly, who follows religious rituals regularly. And I think this movie, it paints it in the colors with the brush of a cult in the middle of the Swedish Alps. But I think it's just one of those messages on how certain aspects of organized religion, it's a slippery slope. One day you're peacefully chilling out in the middle of the woods taking drugs. Next thing you know, you're killing somebody because they got to fucking 85 years old, and it's like adios.
Yeah.
So
I think what where you're going with it, where I'm going with it is, we've talked about all these other movies where there's these religious traumas, whether it's Christianity or Catholicism. And in this one, you have something that you can literally get on Google and, type in Swedish Midsummer and go there and celebrate this festival as part of a celebration of summer. And they do wear flower crowns and they do dance around maypoles. And there are all of these things.
They are real as real can get.
But they're not a cult.
No,
there are definitely, it's another aspect of religion changing it into one, though. And I think it's kind of cool seeing that in a movie, because something that really has such a cool, origin of its celebrations, and turning it into something as creepy as it is, because all these people they act so happy in the movie, and they're like, oh, well, it's a blessing to be this old and to go out this way and to do the things that we do, but ultimately it's not fucking okay. It's still really fucked up. And, where the movie ends is, a lot of people like to say you go girl, because she gets out of these toxic situations, but at what cost?
Well, and to me, I love the interpretation that a lot of people have pointed out. She goes from one toxic relationship to another, which, not to get too psychological with it, but really it's like, sadly, that is the cycle and the loop that a lot of people get sucked into, is just you go from one abusive situation and one toxic situation to another. And Ari Aster takes 2.5 hours to tell us a lesson that a lot of us sadly have to learn the hard way. And I think for him to be able to weave this incredible story of religious trauma, toxic relationships, and the consequences of both, and the harsh realities of both, I think he, as much as I love Hereditary, to me, I feel like I connect with Midsummer more, and I feel like it ultimately is, in my opinion, the better film.
See, and I like that you say that too, because it's really difficult for me to pick. I think the reason that I love Midsummer more is because it does have all of these beautiful aspects of the Midsummer Festival.
Right.
But if you look up the stuff that's with Hereditary, like King Payman.
Indeed.
It's a legitimate biblical demon. So it's kind of like he took the dark aspect, like, and I hate this term, but like the black magic and the white magic shit. It feels like he took something, because Hereditary is such a dark movie, and most of it's in the night and in the shadows, and then you have all these dark demonic entities and markings everywhere, and weird sacrificial shit going on. And then with Midsummer, it's all bright and beautiful, and there's good food, and there's good drinks, and there's flower crowns. But then there's this really freaky undertone, and there's nothing ever really religious about it. It's just like a weird cult mindset. Yeah,
and it's everything you said. I happily co-sign on. There's no other way to slice it. It is a great allegory and representation of these traumatic events on multiple sides of the coin. And Ari Aster, kudos to him. He's got another movie, again, as of the recording of this episode, he's got another film coming out, Disappointments Boulevard, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And if the early reports and news are anything to take into account, it's sure to just ramp up everything that Midsummer did. I said, he did Hereditary, came out of the gate hot. Midsummer built upon that, and it sounds like his next film is going to be even kookier, wackier, and just all out bonkers.
Yeah. I'm excited. I can't wait. I think he's fantastic. I want to talk about a couple more weird farmhouse, bizarre old people movies.
Ooh, bring it.
The Taking of Deborah Logan.
Oh yeah, Taking of Deborah Logan, highly underrated slow burn horror movie that I don't see talked about a lot. Probably one of the more underrated films on our list.
Yeah, it's a found footage film, starting as a documentary for following around a woman with Alzheimer's. And it has a really weird, dark undertone with I almost said suicidal, but a serial killer from the past.
Yeah, it genius spin on the possession kind of movie theme that we see in a lot of these slower burn horror movies. Done like I said, we've talked about some that delve into the religious aspects. This one delves into more of the supernatural elements instead of being possessed by a demon or a devil or anything like that. It's possessed by the spirit. This woman is potentially possessed by the spirit of somebody that was actually actually alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that spin on it. And it goes, not only is that unique about it, it goes places that a lot of these found footage slow burn movies have not gone. It
No.
takes the paranormal supernatural thing to a new extent. And my God, again, through the guise of this story of a woman with dementia or Alzheimer's or some degenerative mental disease, ultimately we realize that's not what's going on. She is
Right.
taken by something
Far more evil.
far more evil. Exactly.
Yeah. And the other one, which is got one of your favorite movie lines, The Visit.
I love The Visit. The Visit, it's M. Night Shyamalan. It's funny thinking back because some of his movies were slow burn back in the 90s and early 2000s, but only by comparison. You know, because like everything else at the time was very in your face, very loud, very colorful, and his movies had those elements but were a little slower paced than what we were used to at the time.
Yeah.
This one, The Visit, is probably his truest slow burn horror movie. I think he takes his time. He's very careful with where he is taking the film and the plot, and weirdly enough, he throws some humor in there for some strange
for
reason.
sure. And honestly, you mentioned the humor. The biggest thing that took me out, and I won't say anything to spoil, the post-credit scene almost felt too light for everything that we witnessed in the last 20 minutes of the movie. But there is definitely in the beginning with these two kids staying at their grandparents' house and meeting them for the first time and kind of reconnecting their family. Two kids together on a weird farm when they're city kids. Of course, you're going to have some decent comedy in it, even with the old people. But it quickly goes dark and uncomfortable. And as with The Taking of Deborah Logan and many of these other movies, there's nothing scarier to me in a horror movie than a little kid running through the house at night, like Paranormal Activity, or a naked old lady doing her shit in the middle of the night. Like X, The Visit, Taking of Deborah Logan, all scary ass old ladies.
Yeah. The Visit might take the cake though, as far as like old ladies running around in the dark,
right?
Like we talked about
just from the trailer, you see that real quick clip of her like clawing at the door when he opens the door across the hall.
Again, it's visuals because it's found footage, because it is the kids documenting their visit with their grandparents.
Yeah.
So it's found footage, and because of that, it is again very visual, and it tells the stories through these shots that you're watching. You're like, that didn't just happen, and then you have and the kids even watch it back, and you're like, whoa, wow, that did happen.
Yeah.
Like M. Night Shyamalan says, like, I know you're thinking right now you didn't see that, but I'm gonna double down and show you did see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a really cool thing that you actually have someone smart enough, I think, with the found footage to kind of be like, hey, this is really fucking scary and we don't like this. Can we go home now? Instead of trying to just like figure it out. And it, for the sake of not spoiling everything, it goes even worse towards the end. But there's just some really terrifying scenes with these old people past the taglines that you hear. And I think it was one of those trailers I felt like I was worried I'd already seen a little bit too much, or it wasn't going to be too scary, but it definitely does deliver a lot of shit, literally, that you just don't expect.
It is quite unexpected. I don't think there's a scene, especially towards the end, where for this being a slow burn, and you're like, yeah, they're going to ramp it up here. They ramp it up in a direction that you would not expect, to say the least.
Yeah.
The one scene comes out of complete left field, and that's one. It's so good. I know I've spoiled a lot here. I can't spoil that one. It is.
No.
You got to see it to believe it.
You do. There's a good, like I said, a good 20 minutes of the movie where it just doesn't stop, and it gives some of the most uncomfortable movie scenes that we've ever had.
Uncomfortable is, yeah, yep, check mark.
Yeah, he's you can tell he's bothered by this one.
I can't. It's awful to even think about.
Yeah.
We're getting towards the end of the episode here. There's one more movie I want to touch upon. In my opinion, probably my favorite slow burn horror movie of all time. No disrespect to any of the others we've mentioned here before, but 1999's The Blair Witch Project.
Oh, it's such a good movie.
Yeah, I can't sit here and say it's the original slow burn horror movie, but it's probably the first slow burn horror movie I ever watched when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I was like 10 years old when it came out, and it scarred me. Even though, as Jordan Peele famously said in a video I saw recently, nothing fucking happens.
Nothing fucking happens.
Not to spoil it for anybody, but fucking nothing happens the whole movie. Yet,
everything happens, but nothing fucking happens.
and believe me when I say that, and I'm sitting here and I'm telling you, I know I'm like contradicting myself. It's my favorite slow burn horror movie, and nothing happens. Because, I can't stress this enough, that's the fucking point.
Right. Yeah. 100%. It kind of goes back to the Paranormal Activity vibes, even though obviously it came well before.
Right.
So I guess you could say Paranormal Activity took a page from the Blair Witch book, but you get a lot of just sounds.
You mean Book
and
of Shadows,
visuals.
Blair Witch 2?
Yes, Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2.
We're not going to talk about that one.
I mean, some people like it, but it's been a while for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that you get a lot of these background sounds, like it's creepy when you hear laughter in the middle of the night in the woods when you shouldn't hear laughter.
And I think that's why I love it so much, because it's the perfect demonstration of what happens when you actually go out into the middle of the woods with your friends. How many times when we were kids did we play in the woods and we're like, did you hear that? Oh my God, did you hear that? Nothing fucking was going on. You were just trying to scare each other.
It's like you're in the woods. It's the wilderness. There's fucking animals out there. Like, of course you're hearing shit. Like, you don't normally hear nocturnal animals because you're a 10-year-old that's like playing out in the park during the day. So when you hear an owl or a raccoon or a possum or any, wherever you are in the world, whatever your night creatures are, they sound weird and they sound scary, and sticks are going to snap and things are going to rustle.
But this one takes those little childhood fears that we had when we were out in the middle of the woods camping, and it turns them into a real fucking movie. And you're like, nope. Right. Count me out. I'm out. I'm tapping out. I'm ready to go home.
And it's brilliant. And it's funny that you say you saw it. You were much younger than me when you saw it.
I saw it when it first came out. I'll never forget. Rented it from Blockbuster, yo.
Oh, man.
Take a shot. We mentioned Blockbuster.
My parents would have never. I saw that shit at a friend's house when I was 15.
I grew up with irresponsible friends who had irresponsible parents. So we delved into that deep.
I only had a little bit of that.
I also had an irresponsible uncle who showed me The Sixth Sense and Stir of Echoes when I was too young for it. But
I mean, honestly, if it had been probably a bigger movie, and I hate to say that, but like it wasn't on TV the way some of the other
Blair
shit
Witch.
was.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I probably would have seen it when I was younger, but not necessarily. Especially I am a little older, but I think I was 15 when I saw this, and I remember my friend that I saw it with would draw that little symbol on fucking everything.
A little twig shit that they do.
Shit, yeah.
I think everybody went through a phase where they drew that in a notebook or sketched it or something. We're all like, I'm edgy. No, I'm like 11, but I'm edgy.
Yeah, like,
no, like
I'm gonna go find the Blair Witch.
Right.
Like,
No,
but
like I
I'm
play
gonna
Tony
make
Hawk
it.
Pro Skater, and my parents let me have the soundtrack on, so I'm pretty edgy for 11.
It is a.
I'm 11, so shut the
edgy
fuck
one.
up.
Oh.
But yeah, that was Blair Witch is again, it is my favorite because, like I said earlier, you can build and build and build, and if you build well enough, and this movie fucking does, because
Yeah.
the tension between the cast and the unsettling noises and the atmosphere that they create. If the buildup is good enough, your payoff doesn't have to be shit. Even though
Right.
the payoff, I admit, in my opinion, for the brief moment we get the payoff, it's fucking worth it.
And guess what?
But it
It's
doesn't
another
have to be,
one-
because the buildup of this movie is excellent.
It is, but it's also another one where your mind fills in the blanks, and that's what's really fucking scary.
And we've said from the beginning, that is the one thing that's how you make a horror movie terrific, in our opinion, is you just let the audience's imagination run wild, because what we fill in the blanks with is going to be 10 times more terrifying than any creature you can create, than any slasher you can bring to fruition. Leaving it to the audience's imagination will terrify them 10 times more than anything you can make physically. And again, ultimately, I think that's the message we're trying to send home with why we love slow burn horror movies so much, is because it lets your imagination create a lot of the tension and fill in a lot of the things that would be terrifying with your own little weird shit that you can create while you're waiting for the drama to unfold.
No, for 100%. And as you're talking about that, another one popped into my head that I actually hadn't written down, but I also love, for that similar reason, is As Above, So Below. Because although you get visuals in that movie, your brain is still trying to kind of prepare itself for what's around the next corner.
It is. It's one of those.
movie.
Yeah, it's one of those what's around the corner type movies. So, yeah, and that's a lot of what you'll see in a lot of these too. So, we have talked slowly about slow burn horror movies,
Yes, we
and we're gonna take our time talking about more in the future, because there's ones I can already tell you. We've only scratched the surface. There's more that we could talk about. We could go on about this.
There's a couple I'm itching to talk
days.
about, but
I think we're going to get into a lot of part twos with a lot of these things we're talking about in the early going. And slow burn horror is something that we have a deep fondness and admiration for, and we hope to talk about some of our other favorites with you guys.
The more you guys request it, the more we'll end up coming back and revisiting these, because I know, and I love hearing the obscure movies that people love that I've never seen. And, that's ultimately what we really want to do, is we just want to share our love of horror with you guys.
Right. And you're welcome to share your love of horror with us. Find us on TikTok at HorrorZoidPod. Email us, horrorzoidpod@gmail.com. And now you can go to horrorzoid.com and find anything you want to reach out to us. Horrorzoid.com.
Horrorzoid.com.
Reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
You heard it here first.
And on that note, we're going to leave you with this. Why are you doing this?
Because you were home.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every weekend. Follow us on TikTok at HorrorZoidPod, and send emails to horrorzoidpod@gmail.com with your thoughts, questions, and stories for us to read on a future episode. To all our Zoids out there, stay scary.